Hello and welcome to Building the Premier Accounting Firm. This is a podcast dedicated to helping you have a successful accounting, bookkeeping, and tax business. As you're operating your company, this is a podcast you'd like to listen to hear from the experts on various things that are related to marketing, selling, pricing your services, offering quality accounting services, training your staff, onboarding your clients, various things that you can do to retain and have a great relationship with your clients, and so much more. It's here that I bring on the experts to have them share with us the various things that we can be doing to not only run our businesses more efficiently and effectively, but also service our clients even better. Now, I'm your host, Roger Knecht, president of Universal Accounting Center, and I've been working with accounting professionals now for more than 22 years, helping individuals both start and build successful accounting businesses. Along the way, I've met individuals around the world. I've worked with them, made friends with them, and more importantly, helped them realize their dreams. It's in this process that I'd like to share with you some of the insights that I've experienced and some of the things that I feel you would benefit from. My guest today happens to be Michael Jones. Michael happens to be the senior vice president of a business development company. It's Knecht, LLC. Michael has led a number of businesses. He's actually helped with the growth and success of some of the technology industry's most dynamic companies. In fact, recently, Michael joined Knecht with a charter to actually bring an excellent fintech platform to the market. Now, prior to Knecht, he served in numerous executive leadership roles, including president and CEO of a publicly traded diabetics technology and disease management service company. Previously, he also pioneered the advancement of video-based telehealth and telemedicine technologies, many of which I'm sure we're familiar with today, as well as led the marketing and sales efforts to provide as a provider of medical information technology. Now, while the executive vice president of sales and marketing at IBON, the company was recognized for consecutive years of growth and achieved or received the magazine Top 100 honors, growing from 20 million to 120 million in revenue in 3 years. Prior to IBON, Michael led numerous sales and operations organizations such as iOmega, Silbel Systems, Silicon Graphics, and Oracle. Now, as a published author, he's co-authored 2 patents in the field of artificial intelligence. He's actually been a contributor to technology in the medical industry publications, as well as a frequent industry and event speaker with regards to various topics. Now, Michael will be honored by the Internet 2.0 for his outstanding leadership in many diverse technologies and markets next month. In fact, he graduated as well from University of Utah with a BA in English. And back in the day, he likes to point out that that's when they were a basketball school more than a football school. So that's something to kind of point out with regards to our ages there, Michael. But Michael has a wife, Kathy. He's been married for 30 years and enjoys skiing, long-range adventure motorcycling, which we will discuss, and Frisbee competitions with his dog, which we'll also bring up, as well as a wide range of athletic participation. He is an active man. So with all of that, Michael, welcome to the show.
Roger, it is an absolute pleasure to be with you.
This is going to be fun. So there's a lot I'm excited to discuss with you. One of the things I want to jump right into is regarding the idea of fintech and what, as accounting professionals, we should know when it comes to this relationship between accounts payables, accounts receivables, and the relationships that either we have with our clients or more importantly, what our clients are having with their vendors and such. So let's look at it from the standpoint of, from an accounting point of view, why this even matters. So what would you like to start with as to that cash flow relationship?
Well, I think over the last several years, the technology industry has finally recognized how they can impact the complexities of accounting and finance. I love the description by Martin Zick that accounting is grammar and finance is poetry.
Oh, there you go.
And being able to build tools and resources to address not just the accounting but the finance is something that is elegant in its complexity, but it also has to be elegant in its simplicity to be adopted. So I think that we've seen, especially over the last 10 years, that financial technology companies are now able to have the insight beyond just the standard ERP, beyond the standard financial applications, but to really understand the next level challenges like cash flow and how to specifically address cash flow. Those tools are now finally becoming available.
Yeah, so what I really like about this topic is the fact that it's very real. Most of the businesses that I've interacted with, the common thread that exists in many companies that I experience is they're really good at doing what they do from a business perspective, selling their product, their service. But when it comes down to cash flow, they've got the sales, but sometimes they've extended a line of credit. Maybe they've got net terms relationships with their vendors and customers. And there's this cash flow bind that happens where, yes, the sales are occurring, but the cash flow isn't following. And all of a sudden, we're in a position where, as a company, whether it's an accounting business or more importantly, our clients, they're dealing with situations where monies are owed, but yet haven't been received. And there's this receivables kind of rat race that we're going through to try and collect that money. Well, what we're first of all wanting to understand is the product or services may or may not have been delivered, but there is money owed. And sometimes there's principles of factoring contracts. We can factor those monies. We can get a line of credit to kind of float the situation where whether we're the company needing the line of credit or we're the customer and we need the monies to pay the bills that are owed. So let's talk about just the cash flow situation. You alluded to it there.
Yeah.
Give us a scenario that might illustrate well what we're talking about, where a client has sold something but hasn't received payment and why that problem exists.
Well, I think that it's been a little bit of a lions and hyenas relationship between the customer's account payable department and the vendor's accounts receivable. There's that tension of customer wants to hold on to their cash as long as possible. The vendor needs it as quickly as possible. So an example I'll use is let's look at residential construction.
Good.
You've got a general contractor who is possibly receiving supplies funding and some revenue along the way, but there is always a delay in the receipt of the revenue to the customer from their customers. And then that general contractor has subcontractors and suppliers that, especially in a fast-growing environment like I happen to live here in Utah, that has one of the most explosive residential real estate markets in the country. Those vendors and those suppliers are desperate for the cash that they need to continue their operations and to grow. And so closing that gap and doing it in a way at no cost to the customer is really the goal that we have, and taking a unique approach to making that simple with a web-based platform, and also providing all of the financing internally. In some ways, we're effectively a bank.
You know, I liked your simplistic illustration there. What it did is, I think, gave us a real contextual view of what we're talking about. You've got, in the case of the contractor, they've bought the supplies, they've got the job, and in the effort to actually build what they're needing to do, all of a sudden, in incurring the expense of the supplies, the associated payroll, they've got things that are paid and owed. And sometimes what's being delayed is obviously payment for the work that is done or is being done or hasn't yet been completed. And there's that cash flow crunch. And so it's very much a real situation that, in the case of the contractor, they're experiencing. They had to make payroll, they had to buy the materials, they had to get the supplies. And so these are very real costs up front that they're experiencing just to do the job. Another example is, and by the way, I've got a number of clients that exactly fit that mold. Another one that's outside of the construction is a swag company that's a client of mine. In working with them, they would obviously have orders for the swag that they're producing for the client. They're getting it branded. They're needing to bring it typically overseas, or they maybe have it in stock. But the point is that the customer generally doesn't want to pay until they've received the merchandise.
Correct.
But yet the swag company is purchasing this. They're then putting on the logo. So there's putting a good deal of effort into the embroidery or the silk screening. And in that process, they're incurring a great deal of expense, not only the large upfront expense of the actual merchandise itself, but there's the expense of the labor and such to then brand it, let's say. Well, in all of that, there's this cash flow crunch because the customer generally wants to withhold payment until they've received the product and seen that it's exactly what they hope for. But there's all this expense up front that they're needing to pay just to get that product created and produced. And so there's this give and take that you were describing earlier from the accounts payable side from the one company and the accounts receivable side from the other company. And here's where that relationship is. And so creating, that illustration, that need, and that one company wanting to hold the money as long as they can, and the other one needing it as soon as possible. What kind of solutions exist? I mean, let's kind of go down a few items just to kind of set the stage for options.
Yes.
Factoring. What else would you add to the list? Line of credit.
Well, factoring has been probably the most common. The challenge with factoring is it's a one-time event. You're bundling a bunch of invoices, and somebody purchases those receivables
for a fraction.
For a fraction, but it's usually a pretty good. You're paying a pretty good premium for that.
Yeah, basically what the person buying those invoices is saying is you have a contractual relationship, something in writing that this customer is beholding to pay.
Mm-hmm.
You need the money up front. I'll give you pennies on the dollar, 40, 60, 70% on the dollar to basically front you the money that you're needing. And I'll buy the contracts and I'll take the responsibility to collect the receivables. Is that a good summary of it?
Great summary. One of the unintended consequences, I think, of factoring is in many cases, the purchasing company is required, actually the vendor as well as the purchasing company are required to notify the customer that the receivables is now held by a third party.
Yeah.
And that sends a message to the customer, my vendor looks like they're in trouble. Factoring is usually a less favorable option to resort to, and it just has some real challenges.
Well, what it can scream is cash flow problems.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other is, a commercial line of credit or commercial option. The underwriting process is very laborious. It's not dissimilar to getting a new business entity loan or other just difficult to qualify processes.
Yeah. Now, you can obviously, as a company, offer in-house financing, establish a tab, if you will, for the customer. And, do you really want to be involved in doing the credit checks or carrying that risk, if you will? I think a lot of people initially do that with their net 10, net 15, net 30, net 60 kind of services.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that is another option, one that Knecht actually provides, that would be an option that could be considered, especially in these very real situations?
Well, I think one way to describe what we're doing is finance as a service in a way that we work with a customer. They are the ones that are ultimately financially responsible for the payment. We'll partner with the customer, and then we will reach out to the customer's vendors that they want us to work with and propose to them that your terms with this customer may be 210, net 30, or 21, net 45, something like that. And we will propose to the customer that we will pay your vendors when the vendors want to be paid. And we will do that at a discount ranging from 2 to 3% per 30 days. So if the vendor is owed $100, we would pay them 97 cents on that, and they could be paid next day. If they pay, say, at 15 days as opposed to, if they want to be paid at 15 days as opposed to 45, our platform, software as a service, a SaaS-based platform, calculates all of that and automates the payments, either through check or ACH.
Now, the thing I like about this is what you're describing is rather than the company having to go business by business with the customer and assess whether or not they're qualifying for or eligible for these lines of credit or these types of terms. What you're doing as a middle person is you're coming in and you're assessing each of these customers, and through that assessment, approving those that you can. And then in a time of need, I've initially done the product or service. I've extended to them, let's say, net 60 terms, let's say, or net 30.
Right.
But interestingly enough, I have a cash flow need. I've got to make payroll, let's say, in 2 days.
Right.
Well, because I need to make payroll in 2 days, I've got money that I know is on the books that the customers have agreed to pay in, say, 30 or 45 days. You're implying that I could actually, with your services, have access to these funds earlier and say, I want 98 cents on the dollar. And all of a sudden, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and get the money today for payroll. But the relationship with the customer doesn't change.
That's correct.
Because you're that middleman.
And we then get paid by the customer on their normal terms, 35, 40 days, whatever it is. There are some other benefits to the customer that I'd like to point out. One is factoring or a commercial line of credit or commercial loans show up as a liability on the balance sheet.
Yes.
And what we're doing is a service fee. So it does not show up on the balance sheet. So that's one, I think, important distinction. The other one is in a supply-constrained market. If you have a vendor and they have 100 units that they want to sell, we're already seeing fast-pay customers getting vendor preference. That will address many other angles of the supply chain challenge. If you can't get product, everything stops.
Well, what you just described there, I think, is huge. If they were in a relationship, much like you're now describing, where as a customer, they have this relationship where if I needed the money, I didn't have to call and badger the accounts payable department of the other company. I didn't have to try and chase them down. Rather, using your interface, I can just go get the monies paid and then let you deal with the terms as they were already set forth in the beginning. And the thing that I like about this is the fact that, similar to a line of credit, which I would have with a lending institution, this is basically when I need it, I can get it from those customers that have this profile set up. But the beauty of it is like a line of credit, I'm paying interest. Well, I'm paying interest in the sense that I'm taking a slightly lesser amount for the monies owed. So it really does help with the cash flow of the company. And as you were describing, may even give preferential treatment to certain customers because they have this already established or set up with your type of service.
That's correct.
So very good there. Give us an example of why, from a customer point of view, I would want. I mean, you gave the supply example, maybe rising to the top, and I can get quicker services, preferential services, perhaps. But why would I go through the effort of, as a company, qualifying with you and establishing my account so that I would have this relationship with you, when in reality, I just want to do business with the original company that I'm buying services or products from. And you're asking me to jump through a few hoops and fill out some forms that are more or less a credit check on myself. Why would I want to bother with that?
Well, I think the main reason is, think of the administrative process internally around receivables. And some of those challenges, if a vendor wants to get early paid, there's usually a series of phone calls and some process and one-off exception process to appease the vendor. And usually, or oftentimes, each one of those calls is an arbitration. Terms have to be nailed down, discount. We're seeing Many organizations say they don't do that, but the more that we look inside of the life of the controller, we see that that's happening on a regular basis. So the first big area is simplifying the accounts payable process and doing it in a way where all the terms are prearranged, all of the negotiations on rates and discount are finalized, and then the system automatically calculates based on those terms what the discount should be based on the day of the receipt of cash by the vendor.
So one of the things that I'd like to bring up into this conversation, just for some context, is obviously this is very powerful for businesses that do B2B work.
Mm-hmm.
And from a B2B perspective, I think it's only realistic to say many businesses, when doing business with another company, have them set up a profile. It's not really a line of credit, but it is this profile that basically sets the terms for the business relationship. And it's in that process that we're trying as a company with our customer to collect what we're going to need in the accounts payables department to process the invoices and get paid for the work that we're going to actually be billing here in a moment. So to realistically take and say to the client, hey, part of our onboarding process or part of our accounts payables process is we need to actually, or accounts receivables process, excuse me, we need to have you do these things for us. And obviously there's the internal, but to include a service like your own in that onboarding process and say, by the way, if you fill out these forms and build and get this profile set up with this other entity, we'll give you preferential treatment, or we'll extend to you a signing bonus or a discount fee for the services provided. All of a sudden, there's the motivation for the client to literally go ahead and fill out those additional forms, perhaps. But once that relationship is established, my concerns from accounts receivable are being addressed quite well, because now I know I have that much more of a surety of pay. And if I can't get it myself, I've got this interface that I can just go through and just collect the money as needed. So really, it improves quite dramatically the cash flow situations that I've experienced with so many clients, that it's just this, the salespeople are selling. We can see the revenue from an accrual point of view all appearing on the books, but then there's this chase that happens behind the scenes to collect the actual cash. And I think this is, from an accounting point of view, a very important understanding that we need to have as not only accounting professionals, but a perspective of what our clients may be experiencing as they're running their companies. So I'm really liking this conversation. I think it's very appropriate and very real, and it's something that I've experienced time and time again from a cash flow perspective. What ahas do you see businesses having as they choose to use your service that they didn't originally expect, they didn't anticipate, but after the fact, they're like, wow, I didn't see that, but that was amazing. That was very helpful. Can you give us an example of something like that?
Yeah, I think several times we've worked with companies that are established, have been around for a while. Maybe they've had the same controller and finance executive for a number of years. And the perception of the owner or the CEO is that, yeah, we've got a great staff. They've been here for a long time. We know how to address our cash flow needs very well. But when you get then to the finance executives and you ask them some questions about, are you experiencing the same types of challenges that were documented in payment.com recently, where 2% of revenue is often the overall cost of billing and receiving? And that's a pretty staggering number. Then when you get into how do you work with vendors who would like to be paid early so that you can help push liquidity down the supply chain and have a stronger supply chain? And they often describe, well, they can go ahead and take 210, but anything outside of that is a manual process. And then bringing up to them, there are new techniques, there are new technologies that enable that process. it sounds like then Knecht can fill that gap.
Well, one of the things that I'd like to point out as we're considering this is as businesses can accelerate their cash flow, it does enable them to actually make business decisions with a little bit more comfort and ease, simply because they know that the cash is there to do what business they need to do. But from a CFO point of view, from a business owner point of view, it's usually one of the things that you're trying to juggle more from a business perspective than I think a lot of people will really appreciate. And that's why, as accounting professionals, if we can come with these types of solutions and say, hey, have you considered these types of things to alleviate those stresses? We can sometimes be the champion where we're coming in with solutions or options to address a concern that they may not even be willing to vocalize, but yet on the balance sheet, on the P&L, we're probably noticing it. We look at the cash flow statement and we're seeing these types of challenges. We can actually now come with some solutions and options as accounting professionals. Is here's something that you ought to consider doing. And really, what we're talking about here is somewhat new. Why is what we're describing today new to the business finance world? I mean, line of credits have been around for a long time. How's
Sure.
this different or new?
Well, first, we're targeting a very different market than has been previously targeted by companies offering a similar service. Those companies have typically focused to the Fortune, call it 5,000, 10,000, larger enterprise companies that do have those hiccups. We're focused on companies that are in the $2 million to $100 million annual revenue space. And the types of tools that space needs are very different from a Fortune 5,000. They need to be incredibly simple to implement, to onboard, very simple to use, and something that can become a part of the day-to-day practice very quickly, as opposed to some of the enterprise deployments done by these larger companies. Today, we are not integrated to QuickBooks or some of the other accounting packages. That's on the product roadmap. But today, to process the invoices, we have a very simple spreadsheet format that can be downloaded out of any of the major financial packages. That's emailed to us. We upload it into the system, and everything is processed within 24 hours.
Well, I appreciate that explanation, because when I've worked with businesses, I've always liked to have had, from an accounting point of view, a business coaching point of view, kind of a toolbox of resources or solutions. And when it comes to cash flow, I'd like to really, with my clients, address what are your initial lines of credit or access to money. The initial thing is, well, we pay all of our bills using these credit cards for this certain reason. We've got this bank account where we're writing checks. Well, what happens if the card gets maxed out, or you need to pay the card off in its entirety and there's not enough money in the bank? Well, what's your next line? Is it the line of credit? What are your options? Hopefully you're getting away from personal type contributions to the business. But what we're talking about here is literally a way for a business to kind of open up their options as to how they actually get the funds to run the company and pay the bills that they have, and really improve the relationships with the customers so as to help the customers actually in their situation buy the product or services that we're providing. So here's one thing that I'd like to ask. You've run a business. You've been the president of a company. What's your perspective of this type of thing, in the sense of, you've run a company, you've dealt with the cash flow constraints. How would have this been helpful to you back when you were in business?
Well, I think in a couple of ways. One, the company where I was president and CEO of a publicly traded company, I took over from the previous CEO, and we had a lot of warts. The previous CEO probably spent more time trying to figure out factoring strategies than running the business. And so the first learning was don't get out over your skis. Is despite how quickly you want to grow, if you can't meet your cash flow needs, unless you're Amazon. Amazon went years with never being profitable. So that's the first area. Understand your business and don't get your liabilities out of line. But second, the administrative process of dealing through that challenge and even getting to a steady state and getting a combination of vendors in line, it really enabled us to focus on what was important as opposed to cash flow is almost after the fact in many ways. So that's, I think, a personal experience where we were spending so much time on payables that it distracted the business, distracted leadership from actually running the business.
I really appreciate that perspective because I have seen that where the cash flow concerns become so overwhelming that they're really stifled as to their ability to run the company because this becomes a distraction. And it's obviously a needed distraction. It needs their attention. But it's unfortunate because there are things today that I think can help manage or mediate that concern. The other question I wanted to ask is, you've done a lot with artificial intelligence. A lot of times in the accounting space, there are things that come up that include or involve artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, with your patents and with your experience, what insights would you have for us, maybe from a layperson's point of view, as to why artificial intelligence can be helpful, and maybe some insights as to what's in the horizon, what might be coming down the way that we should be aware of?
Sure. Artificial intelligence does a great job at taking a given pattern, and based on that pattern and the elements in that pattern, being able to recognize and direct the process through branches of decision trees. So I think that as we look at things like artificial intelligence as it applies to finance, there are very clear patterns that happen in the business cycle where, based on what's happening within the financial model, various alerts or changes in the process can literally be automated. And we're seeing that now in some of the high-end financial packages. They are starting to utilize pattern distinction and opportunities for automation that are an analysis that come out of the AI system. So AI does a great job on decision making based on facts. What it doesn't do well are what I would think of as the nuances in finance. I think we've got a ways to go there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your explanation because it's essentially just if-then statements. And
yes.
What you're doing is you're just basically giving the AI the permission and the ability to move down that tree of if-then. And so all of a sudden it can take the norm, the things that are consistent and predictable, and just repeat them. But you're right. When it comes to nuances, when it comes to exceptions, it can really frustrate the system. And that's where I think, one, for accounting professionals, as we're considering how AI is impacting our space, we always have to remember that even though every business likes to think themselves unique and special, and there's no one out there doing what we do, there is an NAICS code that says you are in this bucket. And I think that's the same way for accounting from the accounting perspective. There's a lot out there that can be really systematized and simplified, but at the same time, we're still going to be very relevant with our customers. They're going to need what we have to offer. We bring that personal element to the numbers that we're producing for our clients. And even though a lot of the things can be automated and systemized and through various plugins and platforms, let's say automated, we're in a position where we're still going to be very relevant in all the work that we do. And I have to agree with you. We're a long way from something different.
I absolutely agree. And I'd like to add maybe an analogy.
Yeah.
In healthcare, they've moved to a point now which is called predictive analytics, where based on all of the biometric information from, say, a diabetic patient, blood sugar, blood pressure, pulse, regular taking of those readings, and then combining that with documented information, whether it's weight gain history, labs and blood work. That's where the inferences can start to come in and identify individuals that this person has diabetes, associated comorbidities, and based on those things and recent trends, we need to preemptively get in front of this. So it's a lot of inference data that's taken in, or excuse me, a lot of raw data taken in that can allow inferences and guide the treatment. I think that's the next level for AI in terms of incorporation into financial applications, the ability to take lots of different disparate data types and form an opinion about those and give the opinion to the financial leadership.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole. If this is something you have information on, let's see if we can discuss it. But just as an example of the technology that's out there and where this could lead, is many people walk around with these watches that take their biometrics, and with regards to those watches, the technology technically exists that there can be a lot more assessments going on of someone's health based on what the readings are. However, as I've understand the industry, they've actually turned off some of the sensors or not added in the software for these because they don't want these phones or these watches to necessarily become medical devices.
Correct.
And so the technology exists there, but they don't want to be sold as medical devices that are literally analyzing our health. So they simplify them. They take off some of the technology that they really could implement and don't really activate those things simply because of the fact that they don't want to be seen as a medical device. Can you elaborate on that? Is that something that you know anything about?
Oh, I've been deeply involved in that.
I thought you might. I thought this would be a safe conversation.
The FDA and Health and Human Services have a series of device requirements.
Yes.
And the base level certification for diagnostic patient health information is called a 510K approval. So a medical device that's going to put off any information that is accepted for diagnostics and treatment has to be approved through this 510K approval cycle. When you look at Fitbit, iWatch, and a number of others, there are so many possible deviations from an accurate reading that it really isn't easy at this point to get the 510K approval. So now I'll break into two branches. One is the health advice sector. I can go on to my iWatch. I can see an approximation of how many calories I burned, my heart rate. Very shortly, they'll be able to do blood pressure estimates. But those are all as guidance data for the patient. I'm not aware of any medical practice that would even accept or acknowledge that data. There's another sector of what are called telehealth devices, which are 510K approved. That would include blood sugar, blood glucose monitors, blood pressure cuffs, pulse oximetry, and others, where that data, for example, there are technologies that enable a blood sugar reading to come off of the glucometer and be received by the healthcare professional, whether that's a population health or disease management company, within 5 seconds. So there is great progress, and there's a lot of skepticism around the wearables space. Again, that would be the iWatch,
Yep.
which just isn't a wearable. It has many other functions, and Fitbit. So that side is getting less emphasis, whereas the biometric 510K device segment is actually accelerating.
Yeah, it's incredible. In the medical space, there's a great use of this technology, and I think it's just the cusp of what we're about to experience as when we go to the 5G and we're able to actually through the 5G networks actually get more real-time data, and they can do more analytics and they can do more assessments. It's for some people it's too intrusive. For other people, it's exactly what they're needing for healthcare. I mean, it's all the way down to sleep apnea with the various machines that are used to keep track of people's sleep rhythms. There's a lot out there, and it's quite fascinating. And from an industry perspective, I think it's just on the cusp, like I said, of so much more that's going to be happening. So your insights there are very much helpful. But you also have something to be said about the mental health industry as well. I know that you're involved with that.
Oh, absolutely. Based on family connections, friend connections, uh, I've become aware of the impact of mental health on our population. And I'll just give one fact. The average lifespan of a a breast cancer patient is about 69 to 72 years. The average life expectancy of someone who is living with HIV or AIDS is 74 to 76 years now. And there are about 1.9 million people in the US who are living with any stage of breast cancer. There are 2.4 million living with HIV/AIDS. There are about 40 plus million people living with a debilitating level of mental illness, whether that's chronic depression, somewhere on the schizoaffective to schizophrenia sector there, bipolar conditions. There are actually 5 documented levels of bipolar condition. So there are over 40 million people living with these conditions. Their average life expectancy is 51 years. So mental health has always been kind of the hind tit of funding and resources, but the negative perceptions around mental health, we can't do a blood test, we can't do simple things to cure these conditions, and so the healthcare industry, whether it's on the pharmaceutical side all the way to the healthcare delivery side, is financially disincentived to emphasize that sector of care.
Yeah.
The largest provider of mental health services in the U.S. is the federal prison system.
Unfortunately, yes.
So this has been an area where my family has been very dedicated. I've been very involved with an organization called the National Alliance for Mental Health, mental illness. NAMI is often how it's anachronized.
Yep.
And I've done everything from being the Utah chairman of the nonprofit to being a counselor, mentor, and instructor for families that are trying to understand how they can best serve and care for their loved one with mental illness, as well as survive the process themselves.
So what you're describing there is something that more and more of us will recognize as being common in our lives, which is to say about 20 to 25% of the population, as I've typically read, will actually have one of these mental illnesses that might be debilitating. And it's more common than, like you were describing, somebody or knowing somebody that actually has breast cancer or has HIV or
Yes.
so forth. So it's more likely that we know someone that's struggling with this. The other side of it is, though, is it's not as easily treatable. It's not something like we go to, let's say, with breast cancer and have a mastectomy or perhaps have some radiation or chemotherapy. What we're dealing with is something that is a little bit more elusive, and it's difficult to diagnose and it's difficult to treat. One of the questions I would have, just with your experience with it, is my understanding is it actually doesn't really manifest itself until later years in life. In my familiar circumstances, it's typically in the 20s that I've seen some of these things become diagnosed, meaning in the teens, it wasn't really obvious, but it became much more prevalent or obvious in their 20s, and that's where the diagnoses usually happen. Is that what you're familiar with as well?
Well, onset differs a little bit based on type of condition. Um, Chronic depression and chronic anxiety oftentimes shows up in the early teens. And that can be partnered with everything from bulimia, anorexia, lots of other things. So that oftentimes happens a bit earlier. When you start to look at bipolar conditions, that's a little later, late teens, early 20s usually. And then schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, is a little bit later than that.
Yeah.
But the overall average is the 20s can be a very tough time.
Yeah, what you're describing is exactly what I'm familiar with. So one of the clients that I work with happens to actually run a therapeutic company where he does teenage counseling, basically works with youth that are dealing with anxiety and depression. And so it is generally, like you described, in the young teens when that typically starts to appear. And since COVID, I know that the numbers have actually skyrocketed as to the number of people that are dealing with high levels of anxiety or depression, that it's debilitating their ability to function in day-to-day activities. And then as for abusive things, one of the clients that I work with actually is a real rehabilitation clinic. And it's interesting how it's later in the 20s and so forth, as one of the coping mechanisms for the anxiety and depression, all of a sudden, a lot of these addictions start to reveal themselves. I've got a very good friend of mine. Her brother passed away at 56 with alcoholic complications. And coincidentally, I just had a cousin that I attended his funeral just this last Saturday, and his was a result of alcoholism and basically drank themselves to death. And it's a very sad, sad way to see someone go. When it comes to mental health, what kind of resources are available for family members that maybe we could just real quickly mention?
Sure. I think the one that's most overlooked, that's there for anybody who is on an insurance plan, is that plan is federally required to provide mental health services. And oftentimes, parents especially will think, well, Billy is just going through a phase. He'll snap out of it. And prior to making that assumption, being seen by a clinical expert and really understanding, is Billy just kind of upset because his girlfriend broke up with him and he'll get through with it, or does he wake up every morning hating his life? So the first is getting access to care, and sometimes the insurance companies, it's usually outside of their normal process, and so that can be a little bit difficult to navigate. But there are resources available within those insurance plans. There is also Social Security provisions to provide Social Security payments and services to those who are diagnosed as having a debilitating mental illness. The other that, again, a shameless plug for the National Alliance for Mental Illness. This is an organization that is nationwide and is chartered specifically for the guiding and teaching the loved ones of those with mental illness how to be an asset to their loved one, how to survive that process, as well as providing group sessions and interaction for those living with the mental illness with others that are facing that same challenge, and how to overcome the stigma and deal with the challenges of just living and feeling like you're not complete.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. My brother deals with mental illness, and my mother is the primary caregiver for him, and he lives at home, and it's not a healthy relationship. It's not a healthy circumstance, and these resources that you're describing are ones that people do need to know about, because I think it's a lot closer to home than many of us perhaps realize. And as we each deal with our employees, they may as well be dealing with these things, if not themselves, perhaps within their immediate familiar circles. So this is something I think we all need to be at least conscious of. And my piece of advice would merely be, let the line of communication be such that there's not a taboo over this. I think a lot of people are dealing with more than we realize, and it needs to be something that we can openly discuss. It needs to be a safe environment for people to kind of express themselves. And we need to be willing as friends to have these types of conversations. And then the second thing would be just be coping. We need to, for ourselves, figure out our best ways to cope with things. Stresses happen in life, and we need to understand how we best cope with them. For some people, it's athletics, it's very much diversionary things like that. It's having great friends and relationships. Whatever the coping mechanisms we choose to use, we just need to have good ones, because challenges will come in our lives. And when it comes to basically people struggling, we need to be willing and able to offer what solutions we can as to how we cope with and deal with things so that they don't feel alone. But this is really amazing, Michael. I really appreciate you sharing all this.
One additional point that you hit on a word that I haven't used enough.
Yeah.
There is an internal within the family stigma. A father once summed it up perfectly for me. He said, this whole process has been so traumatic. I can't believe I screwed up my son so badly.
Wow.
And spent some time counseling and mentoring him that your son is dealing with a chemical imbalance in his brain. There's nothing that you could have done that we know of that is increased or lessened the probability that, based on some external triggers or catalysts or other things, there's not a lot you could have done to do anything differently. But now you have to do things differently, get help, learn from that help, and go forward and be happy.
Bringing that up, Michael, is very important, because there's a lot of guilt with individuals who have family or friends that are dealing with this. Guilt of, did I do enough? Am I doing enough? Could I have done more? There's also the issue of enabling. Sometimes there's enabling things that come up, and whether or not they're enabling these things, whether or not they're the cause, as you just described. Is it my fault that they're this way? So these are very natural feelings and questions that people have as they're interacting with people, loved ones, that have mental health issues and deal with addiction and so forth. So I think you're hitting the nail right on the head, and I'm glad we brought this up. Let's go to something a little bit more light, and we'll wrap this up.
Sure.
Regarding your long-range adventure motorcycling, what bike do you have?
I just in the last 2 months sold a BMW 1200cc Adventure.
Wow.
Motorcycle.
Very
it's
nice.
About the biggest dirt bike you can find.
Yeah.
But like many people who buy SUVs, I probably spent less than 10% of my time off-road. But I've been riding for a while, done other things. So some extreme Jeep trails and other fun places where you take the windshield and your turn signals and some other things off the bike. Otherwise, you will break them. But I spent most of the time touring around the West. I've been as far north as Jasper, Canada, as far south into Mexico, Pacific Coast Highway in California up to Seattle a couple of times, and every place in between. So I had the motorcycle for about 12 years. I put over 80,000 miles on it.
Oh, my heavens.
And I love to visit small towns and get up really early and go to the local cafe.
Yep.
And ask the cooks or the other folks at the counter, tell me about your town. And just some amazing stories.
That is wonderful. 80,000 on a bike is huge. So that's impressive. I'm just curious, what's your longest long ride trip that you did, both in duration and distance?
It was 9 days. I went from Salt Lake to Mammoth, California, Mammoth up through Gold Rush area to, let's see, I can't remember the next stop. My next stop was going up the Pacific Coast Highway and stayed in Eureka, California.
Uh-huh.
Eureka to Kamloops, Canada, which is kind of in the barren area of British Columbia. And then from Kamloops up to Jasper, which is just a phenomenal ride. Then Jasper down to Banff, which crosses the Icefields Parkway. And then Banff into Red Lodge over the Beartooth Highway to Yellowstone. And took a little bit of a detour out of Yellowstone as opposed to just riding back to Salt Lake, and arrived back the next day. I think the total trip was about at least 4,000, maybe 4,500 miles.
Beautiful. Are these hotel stays, camping stays? What do you do?
All of the above.
Got it.
I always rode with a tent and a sleeping bag.
Yep.
So I could pop up anywhere that I would guess didn't have sprinklers at 5 a.m. And then occasionally, Tom Bodette would leave the light on for me at a Motel 6, or there weren't many extravagant nights just because there were so many nights.
Yeah, I get it. I'm assuming you went with some people as well. Wasn't alone.
Actually, kind of more of a John Kerouac experience. A lot of it was alone.
Interesting.
There were times I would meet up with people on the road and we would ride together. There were times in advance we would set up a group. And there were a number of times that my wife was on the back as we went to Yellowstone or Zion's National Park, or places that weren't quite as long rides. But on that motorcycle, because of the fairing and the windshield and everything else, it's almost like a clean bubble of air behind you.
Yeah.
And she would actually fall asleep.
How funny.
So I looked at ways to, Velcro belt her or something in a little better, but she survived. It was usually her helmet would tap the back of my helmet, and I would know that she'd dozed off.
There you go. That's funny. Last thing, your competitions with the Frisbee. What dog do you have?
Yes. I've got an Australian Shepherd, a mini Shepherd.
Beautiful.
And I've had many dogs. He's the greatest dog by a factor of 10.
How old is she?
Very smart. He just turned 11, so he's entering early retirement.
Yeah, he is.
He still likes to go out and catch Frisbee. He still likes to exercise pretty hard. But his days of the way that the judging was done in this area was distance times relative distance to straight line, kind of like the pass, punt, and kick used to be when we were kids.
Okay.
And then they would multiply that number by how many feet were off the ground when they caught the Frisbee.
Gotcha.
And so what he was exceptionally good at is always getting 4 feet off the ground. And he would occasionally do silly things like a backflip or other stuff. But we did really well for about 3 or 4 years. And now he's slowed down a little bit, and we definitely had a good time.
That sounds amazing. Sounds like a lot of fun. You must have a great dog. That's great. What's his name?
His name's Cooper.
Cooper.
And
okay.
Ironically, I started trying to get him to catch a Frisbee when he was about 6 months old, and it hit him in the head a couple of times, and he had no interest. And then one afternoon, we sat down for 2 hours and we watched the Purina Dog Chow National Frisbee Championships. And the next day, he was catching a Frisbee.
I love it. I never would have thought of watching a show would have done that. That's incredible.
Well, he kind of saw how other dogs were doing it. And I think you recognize this could be more fun than chasing a ball. And we've never looked back.
There you go. Good. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I appreciate your time with this, and I'm going to come back to you for a closing thought. But as I wrap this up, there are a few things that I want to cover. The first thing, just a quick offer that Michael's making here for anyone that is a consultant, a fractional CFO, a cash flow advisor, someone that just would like to know about how they can help their clients, especially from a cash flow situation. There is a solution. There are a variety of solutions. And obviously, here with Knecht, you can take advantage of their services and perhaps improve that client partner relationship that you have with your business. Now, they do actually have some various programs for us as accounting professionals if we would like to actually participate as partners or affiliates to Ventec that you can check out. What you'd want to do is go to the episode description for today's podcast and there find the information that you're needing in order to actually find out more about Ventec and what it is that, or Knecht, that you can actually take advantage of and do. Now, with Knecht, the website for them is myvenknecht.com, but go to the episode description because you'll find there Michael's contact information. You can reach out to him directly and find out a little bit more about what it is that they do to help you as you're working with your clients to ensure that they have the cash flow needs met with your services. The other thing that I want to suggest is with regards to this is you should also have, as an accounting professional, the book Red to Black in 30 days. It's a small business accountant's guide to quick turnarounds related to cash flow. It allows you to actually become for your clients what's referred to as a profit and growth expert. So I encourage you to go and in the description of the episode description today, get a copy of the ebook In the Black in 30 days and see what you can do to actually apply these principles with your client and become for them, again, the profit and growth expert. Now, with this being said, as a summary of today's conversation, let me just kind of point out a few highlights. One is definitely this whole idea of cash flow. Again and again, I see clients struggling with that. They're obviously providing great quality products or services, and there's that relationship between I need the money now and the client or customer rather is withholding it for whatever reasons that they may. To find solutions to manage or tackle the cash flow problems that we face as we work with our clients and perhaps even in our own business is a very important part of running a company. And we need to have those policies, procedures, systems in place to address those needs. And I thought today in the discussion, we talked through those processes, addressed some of the common challenges that are faced, and addressed even some solutions that can be considered as we look at helping our clients have the cash that they need to run their companies. We also, in this conversation with Michael, got off into some very important topics, some related to mental health. I think it's a very common thing, as he illustrated with the numbers, that it's very likely we know someone either within our own families or familiar circles, perhaps even at work, that are dealing with these issues. Some are illnesses that are basically going to be in perpetuity. They're needing to learn how to deal with and perhaps through medications address those situations. Others may be systemic just because of some crises that have come up in their lives, stresses or anxieties that have come about. And we need to be able to be, if nothing else, more sensitive and aware and be willing to talk about so as to help where we can as people deal with and cope with these situations that they have. If you happen to be yourself dealing with one of these things, a very common one with running a business is that of the imposter syndrome. Please reach out and find some support and resources. Get the help that you need. You're not alone. There's no reason that you should feel alone. There are a lot of people that obviously care for you and are willing to be there for you. And if you don't have that type of circle, I invite you to reach out here to Universal Accounting Center. We do have an advanced coaching program for individuals to actually help address these things and coach you through these things in a way that's very effective and productive. If you actually need professional help, reach out to the resources like he mentioned. There are associations and organizations, national ones, that we can lean on and find the resources that we're obviously in need of if we're needing that professional help as well. The last thing is I just love the adventure biking, something that I do. I've got a bike myself, and I go out with my brothers, have an amazing time getting off into the off-roads, and it's just a beautiful experience to escape and get away and experience the outdoors. And then who can complain about a dog? Having a loving dog is one thing, man's best friend, but to be able to go out and throw frisbees and do it professionally sounds like a lot of fun. So, Michael, thank you for being on the show. What closing words would you have for us today?
Well, I really enjoyed speaking with you today. I think we covered the discipline of accounting, the nuances of finance, and how they really apply to the real world. And in that challenge or set of challenges, cash flow and balancing that process and the tension between customers and vendors is one that now we have means of addressing it. So I'd encourage all past, present, future listeners to join this and all of Roger's other conversations.
Thank you for that, Michael. I definitely want to encourage that as well. If you've not already become a subscriber of the podcast, please do. It's very simple. Just whatever platform you prefer using, just go ahead and subscribe. And in doing so, also accept the notifications for the future episodes as they come out. We release a new episode each and every week on Wednesdays typically. And with that being said, we have a number of past episodes that I would invite you to go back and binge listen to. There are great conversations, resources, information filled type episodes that you'd want to take advantage of. So with that being said, let me just kind of wrap things up by obviously encouraging you to also reach out to us here at Universal Accounting Center. If you'd like more information about these principles or the things that we've discussed or other things that we've covered in past episodes, give us a phone call. You can reach us at 801-265-3777, or you can visit us online at universalaccountingschool.com. Always remember this, if it's about accounting, it is universal. Take care, have a great day, and be safe out there.